Hey, it's more You're All Doomed, the podcast that splits Friday the 13th Part 3 into 13-minute chunks. I'm big fan of Scary Basements, Greg.
And I'm just Brian.
And this section begins with Debbie puzzled by blood dripping onto her magazine and ends with Chris dangling out a window. So reading an article about Godzilla is interrupted by blood dripping from above and makes Debbie kind of pause and look up.
She sees the inexplicably mangled and twisted body of Andy's stuck in the rafters above. And it's a pretty quick shot, but I'm having a really hard time figuring out what I'm looking at because of the way he's kind of packed into this area. It just doesn't really seem to make sense.
Yeah, I froze it. I paused the image and I took a good look. And it's pretty great. First of all, they use the actor. So it's not like it's a dummy, or at least part of it is not a dummy. It's actually the actor. He's been cut in half at his midriff, and then his legs have also been split apart. So he's in three pieces stuffed up into the rafters, and you can see some of his entrails, and there's blood dripping out of his mouth directly into the camera in a good 3D effect. But it's really, really gory, and I think it works best when it's a quick image because your brain almost can't process what it's seeing.
That's
it's so
how I
horrific.
Experienced it, yeah.
But it was great. It's really good effects work.
So at least we know that he wasn't sliced all the way through. It stopped at some point because otherwise his head would have been cut in half as well.
Yeah, I get the sense that it cut him in half at the waist, and then his legs kind of separated also. So it's super gross. But she only has a moment to realize what she's seeing before Jason's arm reaches from below and it takes a little page from his mother's book.
Yeah, I thought the same exact thing, that it was kind of an homage to his mother. Just kind of grabs Debbie's head from behind, from underneath the hammock, and then jabs the machete from underneath through Debbie's chest. Very reminiscent of how Kevin Bacon met his fate via Mrs. Voorhees in Part 1. So I thought that was a very nice little sweet touch to his mother.
Yeah, the effect isn't as great as it was with Part 1. Tom Savini's and Tassos Stavrakos did such a great job with that arrow poking through Kevin Bacon's neck. Apparently, there's some environmental issues with the set being a little bit too hot, and the latex skin was not behaving properly. So the blade had to make more of a tenting of the material before it poked through than they intended. So it didn't go off seamlessly, but it's still pretty great.
Yeah, I like that.
But that's the end of Debbie, and by extension. I don't want to get too far into an abortion debate, but one could argue that it's also a kill for the fetus that's inside her.
Yeah, and that's why this whole kind of like pregnancy subplot just never paid off, because there was never anything where like it would have been better. I mean, you could have easily paid this off by just having her have a brief second where maybe she sees Jason, she sees the knife coming towards her, and she has 1 second to say, "No, wait, I'm pregnant," or "No, not my baby," or just something that kind of like adds an emotional impact to the kill. But instead, she's just surprised and killed, and that's it. Like,
yeah, and you could almost forget that she mentioned she was pregnant. There really was no payoff there, nor would I really particularly want a payoff there. So it was just an unnecessary detail all around. But yeah, she's been gouged through the neck from the back, which is a pretty bad way to go. So we say farewell to Debbie, played by actor Tracy Savage, who was a child actor and had been in a lot of things. And this was kind of her swan song in the acting world, because she went on to become a TV journalist. And was in fact working at a station in Dayton from 1986 to 1991, which was like almost exactly when you and I would have been watching this movie on cable a lot. And if we had known that she was in Dayton, we probably would have asked our mom to drive us to a road trip so we could like stand outside the station and get her autograph or something. That's too bad the internet didn't exist back then. She went on to some renown because while reporting on the O.J. Simpson trial, she was called to the stand to reveal some of her confidential sources and refused, and was threatened with jail time by Judge Lance Ito. But she was protected by California's SHIELD law, which had been enacted to protect journalists who don't want to reveal their confidential sources. So that was pretty interesting.
I also found that her brother, Brad Savage, played Danny in the original Red Dawn. And I knew when I read that, I'm like, oh, wait, I know who Danny is. I think I know who Danny is. And I had to go look at a cast photo. And as soon as I saw him, I'm like, oh, yeah, of course, Danny. So that's kind of cool.
Very cool. That's awesome. After Debbie's demise, we do a quick refresh on Rick and Chris's whereabouts. They're still coming through the woods to get back home after the car went dead. Rick is surprisingly skittish in the woods at night, and at one point hears a sound, and he's like, "What's that?" Which is kind of a dick move, considering that Chris just told him this story of her harrowing encounter in the woods 2 years ago. He should be a little bit more chill and worried about her getting scared and not being such a chicken shit himself.
Yeah, like, hey, Chris, and like put his arm around her, like, let's get out of here, But for the first time in, probably any of these movies, they don't investigate what the noise is, which I thought was funny because usually there's always something. They're like, oh, it must be Shelley, it must be Chuck.
But there's really no point to that little scenelet, because we then cut back to Higgins Haven to a really kind of silly 3D effect of popcorn popping up from the stove into our faces.
I don't think it's silly. I actually thought it was kind of cool.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
It was one of the more, I'm sure it would be one of the more fun 3D moments of the movie because there was just so much popcorn coming at you. I thought it would be kind of fun to watch. But I mean,
it makes me think that Chuck is an idiot because he didn't put a lid on the popcorn. I mean, granted, he's baked, so that makes some sense. But
I do like that he's trying to catch the flying popcorn in his mouth, which is probably something I would have done as well.
Good. Yeah, good improv by the actor, perhaps. The power goes out, as often is the case in these movies. And so Chili convinces Chuck to go down into the cellar to mess with the fuse box. And he grabs a flashlight and does that cliched thing where he smacks the flashlight to get it to work, but it was already working. You really only do that when the battery seems to be wavering or when the flashlight isn't lighting up. So that was just an unnecessary piece of flashlight business.
Do we know, is this fuse box in the basement of the house, or where is he?
So he has to go outside and go around to another, like around the side or the back of the house and enter the cellar from outside. So I think it's still part of that structure, but I don't think that there's like access to the cellar from the kitchen through a doorway. So it's not like the
basement necessarily. You have to access from an outdoor door.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he doesn't have his shoes on, which is one thing that I thought was really gross. Probably the most disturbing thing so far in the movie is that he's walking around in this somewhat flooded kind of cellar, and he doesn't have shoes on.
Yeah, it's more than just damp. There's like standing water down there. Yeah. I guarantee there's a colony of brown recluse spiders that has set up shop in that place. It's really dark and poorly lit. It's just gross. And yeah, he's got no shoes on. I would not have even really enjoyed being the actor on that set. That would have been just kind of skeevy to me.
We get a quick 3D scene here. It's like a petrified skunk or something that's like on the shelf. I think it's dead.
Yeah, I think it's been taxidermied. It's stuffed. That
perhaps makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah, why someone would do that to a skunk,
and then leave it in the cellar.
Right. He's also momentarily entertained by an illustrated nudie pinup that looks like it's from the 50s or something like that. But you can't pass up an opportunity for a little TNA. Back upstairs, Chili hears something at the door to the outside and opens it, figuring it's Chuck. And instead, she finds Shelley leaning in the door jamb with his throat slit. Apparently, knowing Shelley, it's probably just makeup, and he's pulling another joke.
Grasping at his throat, but he's also having trouble breathing, and he can't say anything. And Chili isn't buying it. She's like, "Yeah, whatever," and just basically turns her back on him and just says, all right, continue on.
Which is pretty brutal because, I mean, we can go ahead and spoil it, but Shelley does die here. Chili doesn't realize it yet, but he sees her turn away and think that it's just a joke. And so you can almost see in his eyes like, oh, I just got served.
Yeah, the boy who cried wolf is suddenly realizing that he, did it one too many times.
Yep.
And he can't say anything because his throat has been slit. And so, it's that realization of like, shit.
The ironic punishment.
Yeah.
So we can wave goodbye to Shelley, played by Larry Zerner, who was cast in this movie while handing out flyers for a movie called The Road Warrior. That it's interesting that that's the case. It's a little bit of a coincidence because, for one thing, it confirms that The Road Warrior came out before this movie, which I knew anyway, but it just confirms it. It was out in Australia first and then released in the United States. But that's noteworthy because we didn't really touch on this when we were discussing Jason's new appearance in the previous episode. But why a hockey mask? Where did that come from? There's some indication behind the scenes that it was just a stand-in for a momentary on-the-fly decision. Someone happened to have a goalie mask in their bag because they were a hockey fan. They threw it on the actor and realized that it kind of worked. It was kind of scary, but I almost think that it may have been perhaps unconsciously inspired by the Lord Humongous, who is a character in The Road Warrior, who is a bald, hulking, threatening man. He's the main villain, wearing a steel goalie mask, and he's a spooky character. He's very threatening, very menacing, and I wonder how much of that maybe led to them leaning in this direction for Jason, because he's not entirely dissimilar in his appearance. And The Road Warrior was really, really popular just before this was made. So,
and it wouldn't be the first time that they borrowed something. We could argue that they stole the potato sack / pillowcase from the town that dreaded sundown, and then there's this. There's evidence that maybe they're just paying homage to
right, and fair play. That I've got no problem with it. I mean, they were absolutely right. I mean, whatever they hit upon with this hockey mask, it worked because that's the cultural phenomenon icon that we all know, and it worked. So fair play to them. Larry Zerner left acting and has gone on to become an entertainment lawyer. Notably, he represented George Lutz, who you may know as the inhabitant of that house in Amityville, Long Island. When they remade the Amityville Horror as a movie in 2005, starring future Deadpool Ryan Reynolds, George Lutz thought that treatment was a travesty and sued the filmmakers. Unfortunately, he died during the lawsuit, so I'm unclear of whatever wound up being resolved there. But Larry Zerner was his attorney, and Larry Zerner also appeared in an episode of Doug Loves Movies in 2009. So that's kind of fun.
We rejoin Chuck down in the cellar where he's finally found the fuse box, and he pulls the lever and the lights come back on very easily, and we see that Jason is standing directly behind him, which I thought was a really nice touch.
Yeah,
because
that was great.
There was no hint that he was down there before. We probably figured he was, but it was just like lights are on, boom, there's Jason. I really like that. And we don't get a lot of still moments of Jason like this where he's just not doing anything, and so the fact that he's just kind of like lurking behind him is I think what I enjoyed about it the most. So
yeah, and he's biding his time. He's waiting for the perfect moment, which I kind of like. It just shows that crafty side of Jason.
And it also shows some forethought into what's going on. Jason cuts the power. He knows someone's going to have to come downstairs to check the fuse box, and so he's like, well, I'll just wait here until they get here. And I like that.
Yeah, he's setting little traps, kind of. I dig that a lot.
Jason quickly grabs Chuck and throws him into the fuse box and electrocutes him, which I thought was kind of lame.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that death.
It's, electrocution deaths are usually pretty anticlimactic, and for Jason, I just didn't think this was particularly creative, and he had him cornered in a cellar, and there's, he could have done something better, but...
Yeah, I get the sense from a behind-the-scenes perspective that was intended to be much, much gorier. I'm unclear as to whether or not it was ever actually filmed and then maybe censored, but the original plan was for it to be much more disgusting. I think like Chuck's headband was even supposed to catch fire, and that some blood and stuff was supposed to pour down his out of his eye sockets and stuff. So that's too bad, because it is kind of a forgettable death. But Chuck was played by David Cadams, who went on to appear in a movie called The First Power. So he's been in a flick with Lou Diamond Phillips.
One thing I didn't think that they made particularly clear is that he was engaged to Chili. I assumed that they were, in a relationship together, but, when I did some digging, it turns out that they were actually engaged.
Is this the fan fiction that you wrote about Chuck and Chili?
Yeah, you'll find it on page 342.
Oh, excellent.
Because Chuck is being electrocuted, the lights are flickering on and off in the house, and Chili is wondering what's going on, and she sees Shelley still lying on the floor, and she kicks him, and then it's at this point that she realizes that he's actually dead, and she really freaks out.
She does. I think that she delivers some pretty hilarious stoned/scared horror acting. She's kind of strolling around the cabin, oh my God. And it made me laugh pretty hard this time.
Yeah, it's kind of comical and perhaps kind of accurate if someone is, seeing something that, so shocking and they just don't know how to react. They're just very hysterical and just don't know what to do. And so she's a little out of control, but there is some comedy to it, but she does a good job. And that's when she heads upstairs to tell everyone that Shelley is dead, I'm guessing. And we see Jason grab a burning hot poker from the fireplace. So he's got some plans in place.
Yeah, and I really like that that we hear her scream when she evidently finds Debbie and Andy's remains, but we don't see that happen. It's just we're still downstairs and we hear her scream from upstairs. That was a nice touch.
Something I noticed in this scene too, and I don't know if it was the first time they've done it in the movie, but this is the first time I noticed it. But as Chili is coming back downstairs, there's like a nice crane shot that, it's like a continuous shot that starts upstairs and follows her down this like kind of spiral staircase all the way down to the ground floor. And it's just kind of the cool, like fluid motion that just the camera goes up and down and follows these people. You see it again a little bit later in the movie, but as people go up and down the staircase, they utilize this crane. And I just thought it was a nice little creative touch.
Very cool.
After she's, spooked by what we presume is, seeing Debbie and Andy's body, and she runs downstairs. She runs towards the door to go outside, but the door is blown open before she gets there by the wind. It's really windy outside now. And for whatever reason, she turns back around and goes back inside the house. And this is where she's met by Jason. And he rams the hot poker just directly through Chili's stomach.
Yeah, it's another good 3D effect of the red hot poker. And then I kind of thought it was funny that for a stoner, she got a smoking death because you can see some smoke rising behind her.
Nice. And then in something we've seen Jason do before is he actually picks up Chili's body and walks away with it.
Yeah, so he's tidying up.
But didn't care about, leaving Debbie and Andy upstairs, but maybe he just didn't want to lug the bodies down the stairs or...
Yeah, maybe. Or, we know that after he eviscerated Andy, he moved the body and stuck it up in the rafters. So maybe he is staging things and he's carrying Chili off to do something with her body that will, surprise someone later. Chili was played by Rachel Howard. I didn't really see any noteworthy credits from her otherwise, and apparently she also now practices medicine in some fashion. So there's a lot of people who go
maybe it's
on.
a recently legalized type of medicine in California.
Oh, good thinking. Very well, could be.
Rick and Chrissy arrive back at the house. It's really windy.
Rick, for some reason here, he looks like a social studies teacher to me. He's wearing the sweater now. He's not wearing it like a cape. But when I first saw him in this scene, I'm like, wow, he looks like a social studies teacher.
They're kind of surprised how quiet it is at the house, which is understandable because there's supposed to be a lot of people there, but there's just nothing going on, and they even comment about the wind going on outside, and they end up having to force their way in to the house because it looks like they're trying to get in through the kitchen maybe, and it looks like someone's barricaded the door, and so they kind of have to force their way in. And when they do get in, they see that Chuck's popcorn is burning on the stove, and this kind of alarms them because it kind of tells them, well, okay, where is everyone? Why isn't anyone, paying attention here? Rick then walks around the house and tries every single light switch before determining that everyone is gone. And he doesn't even go upstairs to check. He just goes downstairs, or he stays downstairs. He flicks every single light switch because, if one doesn't work, of course, the other one will. Who knows? But then just gives up without going upstairs. And
yeah, at this point, Chris and Rick are sort of in separate rooms. Chris is trying to clean up some of the mess in the kitchen now that the popcorn has been burning on the stove. So she's dealing with that while Rick is flicking light switches. And so they've basically now been split up. And Rick announces that he's going to go outside to see if he can figure out what's going on. And so now they're truly separated. And Chris does some more business inside the house, but then decides that she wants to go, link up with Rick before he gets too far away. So she steps out onto the porch and starts calling his name.
Yeah, I really like this because she steps outside on the porch, and it really is noisy outside because of the wind, but directly around the corner is Jason, and he has Rick in his grasp, but Chrissy can't hear anything because of the wind, and
Jason's got his hand over Rick's mouth, so Rick can't call her name.
Right.
It's chilling.
Because it goes on.
Chilling.
It's not like a couple of seconds. It goes on for like 10 or 15 seconds, and Chris is finally like, okay. And she just decide she doesn't see anything, and then she goes back inside.
And it lingers a little bit longer to give Jason a chance to once Chris is back inside, he no longer needs to cover Rick's mouth. So instead he moves his hands to both sides of Rick's head, and he begins to squeeze.
And squeeze.
And squeeze.
And squeeze.
And in another fantastic 3D effect, Rick's head is crushed, and his eyeball squirts out and pops toward the camera with a fantastic squishing noise. It's the effect is ridiculously fake. It's notably not a human head, as you would expect. It's a dummy, but it's great. It's a good end to a jackass character. Yeah, I love this kill. It's pretty damn funny. It's perfect for 3D.
So long, Rick Bombay, early winner of Best Character Name, I believe. I saw somewhere that his original name in the script was Derek, but they changed it to Rick because one-syllable words are easier to scream, which I thought was a really cool reason to change a name.
Yeah, good adjustment.
What difference does it make if his name is Derek or Rick? Because Rick is easier to scream.
Alexander! He was played by Paul Kratka, who has a couple of credits, but apparently is also now a chiropractor. So he left acting for a time. It sounds like he may have even gone back and done a couple of things after leaving acting initially. But he sends fans autographed photos of him from this movie, along with a couple of other things he's been in. So he seems pleased to have been part of the saga, even though in hindsight his character is a little unsavory.
Yeah, Chris is completely unaware what's happened to Rick outside, so she starts to head upstairs to see if she can, find anyone to see what's going on. And she notices that there's a bunch of water pouring out from underneath the bathroom door, and she goes in, and the bathtub's overflowing, and it looks like it might be filled with a bunch of bloody clothes or something, because it's not clear water. It's very, just dark red.
Yeah, and she reaches in and pulls out, I don't know if it was towels or maybe was it Debbie's bathrobe?
Jason was cleaning up after himself.
Maybe he had to mop up the hallway.
It could be.
But then, that kind of freaks her out. So she heads back outside to presumably run to the van to get out of there or find Rick or something. And Jason is obviously inspired by his mom a couple of more times here. As Chris approaches a tree, Loco's body falls out of the tree in a perfectly timed surprise.
Once again, and we discussed this before in part one, I don't get how these things work, how is that triggered and how did the timing work so perfectly? And this time when it happened, I was just like, okay, here we go.
Yeah. And, again, the Loco's face is to us, so his back is to Chris. So, granted, he got run through with a pitchfork, so maybe she can see the injuries on his back. But Yeah, it's just like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from why you would try to scare a character that way.
But the funniest thing about it is that she was on her way to the barn. Loco falls out of the tree, scares her, and she turns around and goes back to the house, which is where she just left.
Right.
And it's like, make up your goddamn mind.
Yeah, it's just in and out, in and out. The wind is picking up, and apparently the latches at Higgins Haven don't work for shit because virtually every door and window repeatedly blows open, forcing her to scramble over and get it shut and relatched. And it's just like...
it's like a game of whack-a-mole. She's like, runs to one window, closes it, another one opens, and then this one next to it opens, and she's got to hold them both with her hands. And it's like, it's just back and forth and back and forth. And at one point, she even yells for Rick to help her, like, help me, these windows keep opening.
Yeah, I get impatient with that moment. Jason takes yet another page from his mother's playbook and hurls Rick's body through the window, through the picture window, just like Brenda in part 1.
I mean, Chris asked for Rick's help, and here comes Rick.
Here comes Rick. He lands pretty hard. His corpse lands pretty hard on the floor. His head didn't look as bad as I figured it would.
No, and it didn't look like his eye had just popped out because, like, even there was little enough damage that Chris even goes over to Rick and kind of like shakes him for a while to see if maybe he's just startled or stunned and not actually dead. But we saw what actually happened to him, and if his head had been in that condition, you would have known right away that he was dead.
Yeah, his head would have been a ruin. It was not Paul Kratka who was hurled through the window. That was actually a stuntman, but it was Paul Kratka laying on the floor, and it basically just had some, a little bit of fake blood kind of dribbled on his face. So that I wish that had been a little bit more, indicative of Paul Kratka's fate.
What I did like though is that Jason used Rick as a vehicle to get into the house. He throws, Rick through the window, and then Jason then climbs through the broken window, right behind him, and is holding an axe.
Yeah, that's pretty great. I like that shot. It's sort of from Chris's point of view on the floor almost. Kind of a worm's eye view of Jason looming through the window, brandishing an axe. So the adversaries are now facing off for the first time.
And she runs upstairs because that's what you do. How many times are we going to say this? She runs upstairs, but I will give her some credit because she topples over a bookcase, and like dozens of books come crashing down onto Jason below, which I thought was pretty cool. It's not really going to injure him or, but it is going to slow him down and give, Chris at least a little bit of a head start.
Yeah, and I kind of like that her first assault is to attack him with literature. He's brought to his knees by the power of literature, and there's a pretty good 3D effect of the books falling toward the camera. So that was cool. That gives her a chance to scamper down the hallway and hide in a closet. But unfortunately, she gives away her hiding spot because she encounters Debbie's body stuffed in that same closet and utters an involuntary little scream. She immediately catches herself, but then peers through the keyhole or a crack in the door and sees Jason come up the stairs and charge down the hallway at her with his axe at the ready. That was pretty scary. I would be really paralyzed with fear if I ever saw that.
Yeah, Chris notices that the knife that Jason used to kill Debbie is still stuck in her back, and so eventually Jason, is beaten down enough of the door that he can, kind of reach through and try to grasp at Chris. And Chris takes the knife from Debbie's back and stabs Jason in his hand. And from what I can tell, this is the first time we've really heard Jason. He kind of makes this, yelping noise like, ah!
Yeah, I mean, he grunted a little bit when he got kicked in the nads in part 2.
Well, who wouldn't?
I'm not blaming him. But yeah, this is the first time we hear him in this movie. He grunts in pain and staggers away. Chris bursts out of the closet and doubles down with kind of a slashing attack with the knife, driving Jason back and then stabbing him in the knee. He grunts again and goes down.
And this part is great too because Jason's down. He's got this knife in his leg, and Chrissy's a little bit further down the hall, and he just takes the knife out of his leg and just chucks it at Chris and misses her by inches. It like lands in the door frame, just like a perfect throwing knife.
Yeah, I mean, it was like he was aiming at her head, and I love that that's his first counterattack.
There's some like velocity on that thing too. Like he picked it up and was like, and just chucked it.
Hurls it. That was great.
After narrowly, being hit by the knife, she runs into one of the adjacent bedrooms and she grabs a chair and breaks a window. And we can tell that she's on the second floor of the house. She's pretty far up, far enough that she can't just, leap out the window. She kind of, climbs out and then hangs from, the exterior window frame. And I think her intention is that she's just going to slowly release and, try to limit the distance that she falls. But as she's kind of dangling there, probably trying to get the courage to let go, Jason reaches, through the window and grabs her. And
he grabs her by the members only jacket.
Yeah, and they kind of start to struggle, and she's still hanging outside, and Jason, has her in his grasp, and that's where this episode ends.
Yeah, so kind of a literal cliffhanger almost. From a death perspective, we say farewell to Debbie and her unborn child. We have confirmation that Shelley is dead, and then Chuck, Chili, and Rick. So unless you've got anything else.
I do not.
I think we can call it quits for this episode.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for joining us. I've been Greg.
And I've been Brian.
And you're all doomed.
You're all doomed.